sides of the country, the future, where we're heading, but also the historic past that makes Britain such a great place to be. Now, I think that analogy of past and future and history and future actually works quite well as well when thinking about the challenges facing progressives. Now, we all know, I know for my country, and I know it's the same from some of the conversations yesterday for your countries, that so many people are losing faith in the idea that the future can bring something better for them and for their families. The idea that the future increasingly is something to be feared rather than something to be embraced. And equally, some of the historical discussions and arguments that we thought were just settled way in the past are now we're having to fight for them all over again. The idea that democratic countries, the idea that democratic institutions can actually deliver what people need in today's world. And I think that is the challenge that we face as progressives. Do we have the answers to those questions? And I mean, sometimes I think we can lack confidence in this. I don't mean reacting to what populists are saying. I mean, do we have the answers? Are we on the front foot? Can we show that this is where the excitement, the energy is around some of the big debates in policy and in politics? Now, yesterday, from the conversations that I had, I think we showed that is the case. Today, when you look at the exceptional lineup that we've got, I think we'll prove it again. But I will hand over to Johan to say a little bit more about the conference.
Thank you, Matt. Friends, leaders, fellow progressives, during the most consequential political moment of our time, the Global Progress Action Summit brings together centre-left leaders to discuss the world's most pressing challenges to advance a new progressive policy agenda. The Global Progress Summit demonstrates the unity of purpose and the urgency for actions that progressive governments, leaders and changemakers share. As the largest gathering of progressive leaders in the world, the Global Action Summit creates connections, ideas and outcomes to drive a global agenda for the future. This year's themes, Governing for Working People, is set in an age of insecurity, where global progressives need to find a moment to unite, to meet today's challenges, to deliver bold policies that deliver security, prosperity and democracy for all. We are a global progressive movement, which are strong, confident and we are forward-looking. And here in London, we are setting out a direction for the future. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your leadership. And over to Matt and Harry.
Hi everyone. So Matt has welcomed you all to London, and Johan's told you about the history and the heritage of the Global Progress Summit. So it falls to me to tell you a bit about what we're expecting here today and the programme that we've built for you. So the context today is really clear. A quarter of the way through this century, everyone, everywhere, seemingly all at once, wants out of the status quo. And the question is, what do we move into? What's the new consensus? And so far, the populist right is leading that argument, both at the ballot box, where we see that in recent decades, nearly half the population are either voting for populist parties or they're not voting at all. And both of those groups are basically rejecting the status quo. But also in the battle of ideas, particularly in the last few years, what we've seen is the terms of the debate being dominated and set by the populist right. Whether it's on what the state is for and who it should be governed in the interest of, who gets to be a citizen and what the rights and responsibilities of citizens are, or how nations should relate to global markets and to other nations. This means that progressives need to renew. We need to be able to come up with better answers to the big questions that voters are putting to us and be able to solve the daily challenges that people face. And today's programme has been built to try and showcase some of the energy and the ideas and the dynamism that we see across the world where progressives are in power. Without new ideas, we risk either reaching back for old ones and trying to repeat the past, and that will not work in this new future, or trying to imitate our opponents, which only boosts their brand and heightens the divisions they flourish on. So in this context, the most valuable resource is imagination, is new ideas, is being bold and confident and making distinctly progressive arguments about what the world needs now and why we have the answers to the challenges people face. And so I hope what you'll see on stage here today is a host of leaders and thinkers and activists who are making those arguments, who are doing the hard work. And I hope that you'll be part of a conversation that helps define what comes next. Before I step away, you're going to see a host of amazing stars on stage here today, but the real stars are those that have managed to put this conference on, and they're backstage, downstairs right now, making sure that we're all here and that we're able to have this conversation. So I want to say thank you to all of the teams from CAP, from IPPR and Labour Together who've made this happen, and in particular, they won't be here to hear me say this because they're all busy, but Jess, Aleri, Ollie, Rhiannon and Ali have done an amazing job in making this happen, so they're the real stars of the show here today. Thank you all, I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to hand back over to Alita.
Welcome again, everyone. Now we're moving on to our next session on the AI dilemma. AI, of course, is not just about technology or the revolutionaries around it. It's about power, democracy, and whether people can trust that progress won't leave them behind. So on our panel today, we have Alexandra Geese, member of the European Parliament who helped shape the EU's landmark Digital Services Act. We have also got Farida Bedway, a Ghanaian entrepreneur and disability advocate whose fintech innovations have brought digital banking to thousands. We also have Emma Lopez Araujo, Spain's Federal Secretary for Economic Policy and Digital Transformation, leading efforts to embed AI in industrial strategy. We also have Tim Wu, a Columbia law professor. He's visiting Oxford, and he's a former White House advisor and the thinker who coined net neutrality. And guiding the conversation, we have Megan Shahi from the Center for American Progress. Over to you, Megan.
Good morning. Can folks hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone is sufficiently caffeinated and ready for this conversation. I get the great honor of kicking off our public programming for the day, so thank you all for being here. The session title is The AI Dilemma, Governing for a Digital Future. And I think we're at a really pivotal moment in society as progressives, and really at the intersection of democracy and a choice on choosing democracy going forward for our future, and the advent of technology, particularly with the way generative AI and AI has really come onto the scene and blown up in a very big way. And so today I'm honored to be guiding this conversation. I'm surrounded on all sides by the real experts who I'll introduce in a minute. But the big question we're really seeking to answer here is, how do we govern AI as progressives in a way that protects people, strengthens the economy, and simultaneously prevents and mitigates the far-right authoritarian regime and the risks to the way we really see AI thriving in the future, and how to manage those risks and also simultaneously manage the opportunities, of which there are many. So with that, I will introduce our panelists, and we'll get things started. So to my right, we have MEP Alexandra Geese, hailing from Germany. Ms. Geese is a leading digital policymaker within the European Greens, who played a key role in developing the EU's Digital Services Act, or DSA. She sits on the Industry, Budget, Internal Market, and Women's Rights Committees in the European Parliament, and is a prominent voice on international and social issues. To her right is Farida Bedway. Ms. Bedway is a leading tech entrepreneur who co-founded Logicel Limited and pioneered the development of GCoody, a cloud-based banking platform now widely used by microfinance institutions across Ghana. She's on the board of Ghana's National Communications Authority, previously worked as a principal software engineer at Microsoft, and is currently a platform product consultant at Digital Opportunity Trust, where she's part of the team building and managing digital systems that support innovation and youth engagement across Africa. To my left, we have Enma Lopez. Ms. Lopez is the Spanish Federal Secretary for Economic and Digital Transformation and deputy spokesperson of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. She's advised successive prime ministers and has been central to setting the country's strategy on economic, industrial, and digital issues. And lastly, on the far left for me is Tim Wu. Tim is a professor at Columbia Law School, the former special assistant to President Biden for technology and competition policy in the Biden-Harris administration, and now visiting at Oxford. He coined the phrase net neutrality in 2003 in the White House and was hailed as the architect of the administration's anti-monopoly agenda. Lastly, he authored the forthcoming book, The Age of Extraction: How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threatened Our Future Prosperity. So with that, quite the bios. We'll dive right in, wasting no time. So I will open with a high-level question that I would love all our panelists to really start with. Enma, we'll start over with you. What is the biggest challenge that progressives, folks in the room and out of the room, face in governing AI? And how do we tackle that challenge in a way that not just doesn't just consider policymakers, but also considers people?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for giving us this amazing opportunity to talk about probably one of the key topics of these times. From my perspective, the big deal is not falling into the false dilemma between advancing and regulating. They are not opposite, and in our perspective, they must be together. Why so? Because if we have rules in the real life, why don't we have that in the digital life? Do we really want the digital life to become some kind of the Far West? We don't. But actually, we cannot deny the advance. We need to embrace it. And to embrace it, we have also to create public policies that doesn't leave anyone behind. That has been on the mind of the Spanish government during all those years. For us, it's very important not only to create the material conditions for AI to develop, for instance, 5G in almost the full territory of Spain, but also this high-speed velocity worldwide. It's right now in the 95% of our territory, but also giving grants to all these small companies. The 95% of our companies are really, really small. We call it pymes. And giving them the opportunity to also embrace that technology. And also we're talking about rights. We have passed this digital act with rights, and not only we've created an agency to protect and to preserve all those rights. We are talking about digital disconnection, we are talking about neutrality, we are talking about things that in real life are so clear, but they must be also in the digital life. So as a sum up, that could be that we need to embrace it, we need to regulate it, and we need to advance in that sovereignty, not only in language, that of course is important, but also in terms of chips, in terms of semiconductors, in terms of all these algorithms and the data that is going to rule the next years of our lives.
Thank you. Tim, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here. I think this conference has been great and very inspirational and motivating, so thank you again for having me on this panel and being here in general. I think the rise of artificial intelligence does pose significant challenges for the progressive movement, and I'll say why. I think it's very important for progressives that we remain a movement that is serious about the future, serious about growth, optimism, building an economy, and no one wants to be in the country that's left behind.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I think we do have to learn from some of the lessons of the last revolution, of the internet revolution itself. The promise in that time, thinking back to the 90s and the early thousands, is that the internet was going to make everybody rich. It was very simple. Didn't matter where you, geography was no longer going to matter. Doesn't matter where you were, everybody was going to make it. Because you could work from home, you could invent an app, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. 30 years, 40 years later, 30 years later, we look back, and in fact, there was an acceleration of the process of winner regions and loser regions that was accelerated by the internet. And when you think about it, what happened was that mainly the returns went to the platforms, mainly in the United States, mainly on the coasts. And the rest of the world, and where I live or lived in most of the United States, got a lot of great stuff, was able to buy things quickly and so forth, but didn't reap the same kind of returns. And so I think as the AI revolution goes forward, I think we have to have that example in mind. And we have to think about a kind of building that builds the entire economy, not at the expense of parts of the economy. Frankly, I think voters are attuned to this. I mean, voters are more skeptical of AI than they are of the internet. People are just actively worried about having their jobs replaced. So I think thinking through the economics is really important. I don't think we should want our countries or our regions to become satellites of Silicon Valley, economic satellites of Silicon Valley, nor do I think you want a situation where that you're competing with tax breaks or whatever you can to try to beg for little crumbs of investment. I think if you want a tech industry, you need to have a tech industry. I think if you want to have AI, you have to have AI. But depending on this model, of hoping to lure a little bit of investment is, I think, a risky proposition if you look at the history of the internet in the last 30 years.
Thank you, Tim. Alexandra, we'll turn to you.
Well, I think what we have tried to do is look at AI as a technology. And what AI is today is a power structure. It's an enormous power structure. Just let me give you two examples. I think the first one is the monopoly on information that large language models now have. If we increasingly use those large language models to produce text, that text goes to the internet. This is what AI models are trained on. You see how big the influence is. And we're already seeing that, for example, NewsGuard showed that there was a Russian disinformation campaign that produced text just to train AI models, and 30% of that material spreading disinformation about the war against Ukraine in Russian and Ukrainian language ended up in those large language models, in those AI chatbots. There are other examples from Elon Musk even being proud of saying, well, we tweak the algorithm, we change the output of Grok. So if you control the global knowledge production, this is pure power. And we see in the US the attack on universities, the attack on teachers, the attack on education in general. This is a global effort to reduce knowledge, to reduce the access to objective knowledge, and to control the knowledge production. The second point is that AI is an infrastructure. It's about data centers, it's about satellite, it's about undersea cables. Where does this information travel? It's about having your products and services used by basically every European company. I speak for the European Union here as a European Parliament lawmaker. So that gives you a power to blackmail people. Very simply. And now we see many of these companies teaming up with President Trump as basically their first lobbyist, who is asking the European Union very, very actively and threatening us with visa restrictions, threatening us with sanctions, threatening us with tariffs, that we make a big exception for US companies that don't have to abide by our laws. So this is attacking sovereignty as such. This is taking away the sovereignty from the people. If we believe in our democracy, the sovereignty lies with the people. And what some of these tech companies, together with the Trump administration, are saying, no, we decide what you can do. We decide your regulation. We decide your legislation. We decide whether you can or cannot protect your people. And that is totally unacceptable. And the third point is, where does the added value go? It's the value extraction. I hope Tim will elaborate on that a little. Because the big promise is an increase in productivity. But where exactly is that increase in productivity? Is that really in the industrial production? Or is it more the possibility to have less workers you need to pay? In that case, those workers were paying taxes. Now they might need social services. So where does the added value go? Does it stay in Europe? Does it stay in the place where you employ the AI tool or the infrastructure? Or does it go to a different country and is not contributing to the welfare of the people living in that country? That are the big questions. On the other hand, what is the solution? I think it is actively engaging in that space. I'm not only a lawmaker, I'm also a founder of the Eurostack initiative. That is a movement together with the industry to build a European digital infrastructure. And this is not about creating a wall around Europe. It's about breaking up those walled gardens, breaking up those monopolies, creating open standards, using open source software, creating a network of companies producing AI technologies, AI tools, and everything that goes with it, the infrastructure that goes with it, not only in Europe, but also all over the world by companies and jurisdictions that do not want to accept that power structure, but that want to keep that technology open and servicing the people and not just a few billionaires.
Thank you. Farida?
Okay. So for me, the whole of yesterday and the sessions, I felt very excluded because Africa wasn't mentioned at all in the conversation. And our problems, I mean, obviously, things are a bit different for us, but we still have similar issues, especially when it comes to things like unconscious bias and all those things, when it comes to AI. Because, for instance, if you are looking at doing agentic AI, where we are setting up a health monitoring system, which would make recommendations on things like maternal health issues, most of the data is coming from the West. Most of the data being trained is coming from the West. It's not coming from Africa. So obviously the parameters and things will be different. So a couple of weeks ago, I was actually talking about why Africa needs to get more involved in the conversation. Because if not, what's going to happen is that things that will work for people in the West would be implemented for us, and it will not work because our parameters are different. And our social constructs, our cultural constructs will not come into play in the whole conversation. So it's very important that in Africa, we also look at how can we contribute to this whole AI conversation. We are the second biggest planet, we are the second biggest continent in the world. We have the largest population of youth. So it's very important that we also play a major part in this whole thing. And when we have similar problems when it comes to elections and misinformation and all those things, though not at the same scale as in the US or Europe, but we still have it. So, I mean, it's very important that we also get involved in the learning, in training the learning models and making sure that our data is represented within the learning models as well.
Thank you. So, as we're in the UK and have two Europeans on the panel, I'd love to turn to them to maybe answer a two-parter. That tension between regulating and innovation. We talk extensively about it in the United States. It's part of the reason that the right defends the lack of regulation for technology and that they believe it will stifle innovation and that it is a zero-sum black and white game. And we've seen cases in Europe that really prove that otherwise. And we have two experts here who have worked directly on various pieces of regulation in Europe. And so maybe we'll start with you, Alexandra. How did you approach the DSA and the AI Act when it comes to the right protections, but also not stifling innovation, or really responding to that argument that you're trading off against innovation in order to protect? And how do you respond to that with other members in Parliament and the kind of folks in the room? And then, Emma, you talked about this in your opening, but how do you think about that as far as when advising the Spanish leadership in navigating this issue?
Well, I contest that there's a trade-off between innovation and regulation. There's good regulation and there's bad regulation. And what we shouldn't do is bad regulation. I think that is the point. And just to make an example, I don't know if anybody has seen the Netflix series Dope Sick. It's about the opioid crisis in the US, and there was this one scene where the Sackler family starts discussing, well, we should start doing this in Europe as well. We should get doctors to prescribe these opioids, highly addictive, one of the big causes of the opioid crisis. And then after like a minute, they rule it out because they realize that would never fly in Europe. It would just never work. Well, in the US, it was sufficient to buy the one single person signing off that from the FDA. This is why in the US, the number of drug-related deaths per 100,000 is 10 times higher than in Europe. It's because we have better regulation. So that's good regulation. I totally agree. In Europe, we have a lot of bad regulation. We have a lot of paperwork, and we should get rid of it. But let's look at what is good and what is bad. So what we did with the Digital Services Act, for example, we have different company sizes, basically. We look at how big is the company, is there a risk coming from that company? So for smaller and middle-sized companies, the obligations are very, very basic. And I really defy anybody to find a European company contesting the DSA on the basis that it's too much red tape. While we do have serious obligation for the very large online platforms, the ones with more than 45 million users in the European Union. That's like something like 20-25 companies. This is how you do good regulation. You look at what is really the risk and how can respond companies to that, and then you do targeted regulation really addressing that risk. This is how you need to do it.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
So when it comes to regulation, I'm a software engineer by profession, and you don't want to kill creativity. That is what regulation can do. It can kill creativity because then people will not be as innovative as they want to be, because they know that if something new is coming up, it could be subject to regulation, and it could be, the idea could be mixed from the beginning. So at the end of the day, there has to be a real balance, because the difference between the health industry and the technology industry is that with the health industry, you're just addressing one illness or one sickness or something. That is what you're solving. But with technology, the possibilities are endless. You don't know what can come out of anything. I mean, I can sit down to write something, then before I know I have come up with something that I didn't even think about. So if I have a regulatory body that is actually monitoring my work and telling me I can only do A and I cannot do B, then it would kill the creativity. So we have to strike a real balance, and I don't think we have been able to get it right up to now. That is why the social media platforms and things are largely unregulated, because where do you draw the line?
Thank you. Emma, turn it to you.
Regarding what we were saying in our yesterday's conversation, we have to link all this AI discussion with our will to protect our democracies. That's something that is super important. It's not only about individual rights that it is. It's also about how to keep safe our democracy. How can we prevent the attacks and intervention in our elections? How can we keep safe our people from all this deep fake news, where in the future, but it's not that far away, it's going to be super difficult to define what is real to what is not. So in that case, AI Act and all the legislation we've done in Spain, I think is crucial to protect what we have and stop being like, I don't know how to say it, like probably in a weak position. So there are some stats that says that in 2035, 58% of our jobs, of our employments, are going to be affected by AI. That's also an opportunity, because that could mean an increase of 8% on the GDP. That's really good. And it doesn't mean necessary to lose all that jobs, but only we are talking about improving the way that we work, like losing all these mechanical tasks that last us, and also a great opportunity to increase our productivity. For Spain, for the Spanish economy, for instance, that's a huge deal. But it needs, for instance, for trade unions, how to train all our people to embrace that technology without leaving it behind. It could be also a great opportunity to stop all this bureaucracy, to put together the administration and the citizens, because you have the opportunity to talk to the administration in your natural speaking, in your natural language. So you just talk with the machine and say, please, I need that. And it's going to be much easier and also quicker. So for that instance, that could be not only something that could be weak for democracy, but also a strengthen. And I think that's the point of view that we need to tackle, to embrace that opportunity and to avoid all the risks.
Tim, jumping off the economic incentives and impact on economy point, we talked a little bit yesterday about some of the kind of concentration of power and wealth beneficiaries being among the platforms and the LLM developers. Yeah. From your time in the Biden NEC and your forthcoming book, which we're all excited to read, how do you think about addressing those perverse incentives, right? We talked yesterday about how I spent time at the platforms, and they're set up in a way that will be able to change, really. And so how do you think about that, and what's your advice for this group as they navigate this?
Yeah, I think it dovetails with what was just spoken about as, this trade-off between growth and regulation. So I won't deny, I think it's fair to say that over-regulation can hurt growth. I don't want to lie about that. But there's a very big difference between that and making sure that the spoils of the wealth created are distributed more evenly than last time. What we let happen over the last 40 years is we allowed the tech platforms, which are undeniably convenient, essential, have become the platforms of our economy. We've let them become these extraction technologies that just take too much from the rest of the economy. And I think any mind towards AI policy has to, as you said, embrace technological advance as a means of generating wealth, but at the same time, make sure that we have a technology that is infrastructural, that is building for the whole economy. I think progressives need a build agenda, but it needs to be a build agenda that just doesn't say, oh, those guys, those 4 companies are going to build our future and take all the money. It has to be, how are these AI platforms, how is this kind of infrastructure, maybe like the railroads, maybe like electricity, going to support a lot of other economic activity? That is the kind of build agenda I think progressives can get behind. I think progressives need to harness the power of AI. I mean, this is an incredible time to build things. This is a period where there's all kinds of possibilities. We should, there is this opportunity for flourishing, for countries to build different kind of companies than ever before, kind of the original promise of the internet. And the question is the kind of policies government takes to allow the entire economy to build, as opposed to hoping a few companies are going to build the whole future for us and take all the money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the themes that I think came through there and that has come up yesterday extensively is on messaging, and how the left, I think, can candidly do better than we have been historically. Alexandra, what is your, we chatted in the working group yesterday, what is your advice or your thought on how we can really scale a smaller number of succinct messages across the progressive movement? How would you advise this group to do that effectively if you were given the chance, which you are in your position?
Well, to that in a second. I think it's important to challenge that dominant narrative, like, for example, innovation versus regulation, and say innovation is what serves the people and the planet. That is, for example, I think a message we could all agree on in the progressive spectrum, and try to bring that message everywhere, and then have people, telling you what exactly does that mean. For me, it means, as a European lawmaker, it means we support European industry, we support European companies. I mean, we are supposed to be the progressives who don't necessarily accept the status quo. Who has said that 5 companies would control all this AI power structure? We can build something else. I mean, Taiwan has shown how to do that. India is showing how to do that. Why shouldn't we do that and support that effort as progressive to create a more distributed form of power where everybody can harness the potential of artificial intelligence, but we also have the democratic power as legislators to protect the people from the harms, and we're already seeing the harms. I think that is a common message. Artificial intelligence really needs to benefit the people, and in order to benefit the people, we need a lot of companies working on it in a very networked way. It needs to be open, it needs to be transparent, and let's do this together.
Thank you. Farida, you had really good points about bringing the Global South into the conversation more prominently. And that's something really a priority for global progress as well, in really uniting the perspectives on AI and on progressive issues more broadly. How can we, as progressives, do a better job of incorporating the importance and the feedback and the prominence of the rising Global South, and how technology impacts the Global South maybe in different ways than it does other countries? How can we do better at incorporating that perspective?
So I think we need to engage a lot more with African tech companies, as well as the governments. They are very important, because we have a similar problem as she just said, because of where the data is. Data is the most expensive commodity these days. But when you have data, you have everything. Our data is being housed within these 5 big tech companies. We have no control over it. So I think I've been advocating for Africa to have its own data centers where we can house our data, where we can train our own data models, so that we will not be reliant on information from the US or wherever, because it's scary knowing that your whole infrastructure and everything is being housed in a country or in a region which if today they decide they are going to cut you off, you're screwed. So it's very important that you come and you listen to us, because for too long the West has been telling us what to do, instead of asking us, how do you want us to help you? The conversation has to change from do this to we are partners. How can we work together to make the world a better place?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's time. So unfortunately, we have to wrap it. But a round of applause for our panelists. All right. So,
thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, our next session takes us to one of the defining challenges of our time. That's migration. The UN estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While most are hosted in low and middle income countries, irregular migration into Europe and the US has reshaped politics, fueling populism and really testing democracies. The question for progressives is whether we can manage this scale of displacement in ways that reassure citizens at home while staying true to their values. On the next panel today, we've got Peter Hummelgaard, Denmark's Minister of Justice from the Social Democrats, Diego Rubio, Director of the Cabinet of the Prime Minister of Spain, Dan Restrepo, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. He's also a former advisor to President Barack Obama. Frank Shary, founder and chief executive of America's Voice, long a leading advocate for immigration reform in the US. And guiding this conversation, we have Christabel Cooper, Director of Research at Labour Together. Thank you. Over to you, Christabel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this panel on migration. It is entitled Migration, the Global Governance Challenge of Our Time, and I don't think that that is an exaggeration. Within the last few days, US President Donald Trump has told the UN it is time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Your countries are going to hell. And yet, whether Donald Trump likes it or not, we are living in an era of mass displacement. The UN currently estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While it's low and middle income countries that host the vast majority of those people, irregular migration into Europe and into the United States has disrupted our politics. It has fueled the populist right, and it is placing a strain on our democracies. So the challenge for the centre-left is to find a way to manage this scale of displacement that takes into account the concerns of existing populations in our countries, but which also seeks to maximise the contributions that migrants can bring and remains true to our socially democratic values. We've got a brilliant panel here. I think you guys have already been introduced. So I won't go through that again, though I would just like to add a special thanks to Lasse Ryberg from Denmark, who has stood in at the last moment. As many of you may be aware, the Danish delegation, much of it has not been able to arrive due to what we can only assume is Russian aggression in closing Copenhagen airport at the moment. So big thanks to Lasse for standing in. And I will come to Lasse first. At the Danish general election in 2022, the governing Social Democrats achieved their best result in 20 years, while the hard-right Danish People's Party gained 3% of the vote. Yeah, absolutely. A rare success for the centre-left over the hard-right at a time when migration is such a prominent issue in our politics. Would you be able to just give us an overview of the approach that the Danish government has taken with regard to migration, both in terms of the policy and in terms of the narrative that you were trying to get across to voters?
Yeah, I will certainly try to do that and maintain the focus on an overview and not a historical run-through. But it's important to know the political history in Denmark in terms of immigration to understand why we are at the point we are now. I mean, we all concur that we live in troubling times with war, instability, and we are seeing right-wing party taking power in numerous countries around the world. So therefore, it has been very important to us to be in sync with our population. There are no easy solutions. Often in our progressive family, we have this mantra saying, when they go low, we go high. We would say when they go low, we need to go relevant. This is a question about relevance without losing your fundamental ideological aspects. Already 30 or 40 years ago, we were warned as a party by a lot of our a lot of our local mayors. They were saying they experienced that immigration was getting out of hand. It created a lack of social coherency, and the balances were simply off. We struggled with that debate, those policies, for decades internally in our party. In 2001, we lost power. We lost the election primarily due to immigration issues and issues of crime. So all until we had some years in government during Helle Thorning-Schmidt, but it was not such a great success in those terms. In 2018, we had a new leader, Mrs. Frederiksen, and she set out a new course, a new comprehensive policy in terms of immigration and integration in our country. And our analysis was that we needed to pivot on these subjects in order to get permission from a lot of the voters we have lost during all of those years we were out of government. We had a lot of policy propositions that were a good thing for them in terms of pension age, early retirement, expanding welfare, but they simply weren't listening to us because of our earlier positions on immigration and integration. And one other thing, and that's hard to choose, but the aspect of being authentic on this subject cannot be understated. Mrs. Frederiksen, she usually says that voters can spot if you are talking about a firm stance on immigration while you're crossing your fingers on your back. They can sniff it out, so you actually have to mean it, and that's a harder thing to. You cannot choose that. You must own it in your heart. Yeah. All right. But in our 2018 pivoting policy, we had clear goals. We need secure borders. We need to protect our young girls in Denmark from social control within their families. We need to increase and secure social coherency in public areas of public social housing. We need to protect the wages set up in collective bargaining. We had an ambition of bringing down or contributing at least to bring down the numbers of casualty in the Mediterranean, all the refugees and the migrants crossing the Mediterranean. And we are a small country, 6 million inhabitants with high benefits. And when you arrive in Denmark legally, as a migrant, as a refugee, you instantly get benefits. So of course we also need to maintain some kind of balance in terms of numbers. So with focus on responsibility and rights, we set a new course. Just to point out some of the actual policies, we raised the legal marrying age for non-citizens. We are seeking to establish centres for refugees in countries outside the EU. We pushed for more deportations when people are convicted for violent crimes. And we are actually relocating people, both immigrants and Danes, from the most burdened social public housing areas in order to gain social coherency, in order to re-establish those balances. And as said before, the Danish People's Party, they were at 22% in 10 years ago, and now they came out with 3.5% the last election. And the last thing I would like to say in this round is that we have both enacted hard policies, firm policies, restriction policies, but we are also pursuing a lot of the things that we usually stamp being progressive. We are at 7.7% in 0.7% in foreign aid. We are respecting and upholding international treaties. We are pushing for further deals with bordering countries. We are offering housing and benefits for those who are legally in our country, and we are enacting more anti-racism and anti-discriminatory legislation. So we are quite resolute in our firm policies, but we are also doing a lot of the things that we usually call progressives. But of course, or not of course, we are maybe communicating the firm stances more than all the traditional progressive things in order to maintain this permission with the voters to talk about them, to talk to them about a lot of the other things we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please.
So, a year after the Danish elections, the Spanish Social Democrats PSOE also won re-election with an increased share of the vote, and the hard-right party Vox losing both vote share and seats. And And in case we were tempted to think that there might just be one simple, straightforward winning formula for centre-left parties on migration, Besoy approached the issue quite differently. So, Diego, could you take us through the Spanish government's approach to migration?
Yes. So, at the Spanish government, we know that it's important to connect with citizens' beliefs, but not when that makes you deploy the wrong policies. Our migration strategy is based on 4 principles. The first principle is that we have a moral and legal duty towards migrants because they're human beings, regular or irregular. This sounds basic, but nowadays, unfortunately, we keep saying it. They're human beings. The second principle is that you cannot stop migration. Maybe in the short term, if you invest a lot of resources, but never in the long term, because our forests, our deserts, our oceans are too big. And the need of those fleeing from violence or poverty is too high. So you will never stop it. That's why we believe that every single pound you invest in trying to stop migrants, you're wasting it. You should devote that money to channel migration properly. The third principle, maybe one of the most important ones, is that all those studies published in the 60s and the 70s about the world going overcrowded were completely rubbish. This idea that by mid-century there will be too much people in the world so we won't have a space or water for them are completely flawed. The reality is that most countries, in Europe certainly, are underpopulated and that they're going to lose millions of inhabitants in the coming decades because of demographic aging. And the reality as well, and this can be proof, is that even nowadays, one of the main engines of growth for our economic models is demographic growth. If you look at Europe over the past decade alone, was more than 25% of our economic growth was driven by demographic growth. So what we believe, and AI is not going to change that, by the way. So what we believe is that in 20, 30 years from now, we will look backwards and we will see 2 kinds of developed countries. Those who remain close, they will go stagnant. They will struggle with deficit and debt. They will struggle to keep their welfare state alive, and life for everybody will be worse. And those who remain open, they will remain growing economies, and therefore they will be able to keep their welfare states alive. And there's the 4th principle or idea, which is that we are seeing a lot of people buying the framework of the far right when they forget or ignore the fact that most of the problems that we tend to link to migration are not caused by migration, are not caused by the nationality, the religion, or the color skin of the people, are caused by poverty, inequality, lack of prospects, lack of education. So where you need to solve those problems is not to follow the far-right agenda and say we have too many migrants here. What you have to do is to invest in public services, in welfare state, because in housing, that's how you're going to really solve the problems for all the migrants and for your local citizens. This is the way we see it. And by the way, it's working. It is working.
Thank you for that. Dan Restrepo, I'd like to turn now to talk about some of the countries that are really dealing with the sharp end of mass displacement of people. Around 8 million Venezuelans have left their country over the last decade, and around 3 million of those are currently in Colombia alone. So these are huge numbers. For context, around 6 million people have fled from Syria, with about 1 million people from Syria across the whole of Europe. So, Dan Restrepo, how did countries like Colombia deal with this mass displacement without losing political consent?
And I think it's important to look at Colombia's experience and Latin America's experience. As I know, when we look at migration in the Americas from a U.S. perspective, we spend a great deal of time focused on the 15 to 20% of the migration that actually gets to the United States. And we spend far less time understanding how a region has dealt with the other 80 to 85%. And as you rightly note, Colombia is today, so a country of 40 million people has received 3 million Venezuelans, and the other 5 million that have left Venezuela in the last decade at least passed through, almost all of them passed through Colombia. So migration is very much a day-to-day reality in countries in the global south. And I think to look at what Colombia has done, and this is obviously not my story to tell, and it, quite frankly, from a political perspective, would have been more compelling, I think, from the person who was supposed to be in this seat, who is the former mayor of Barranquilla, Colombia, Jaime Pumarejo, who unfortunately couldn't join us at the last moment. And Jaime's story, from a political perspective, is a very interesting one. So during his time as mayor of Barranquilla, which is the largest Colombian city closest to the Venezuelan border, his city's population grew by 10% in a 5-year period of time, all fueled by migration. And at the end of Jaime's term in office, he left office as the most popular mayor in Colombia. We normally think that that kind of disruption, that kind of influx, it would be political death to whomever was there to have to manage it. But it wasn't for a guy like Jaime, and it wasn't for Claudia Lopez in Bogotá and other mayors. And the reason it wasn't, I think, is twofold. Is they understood, both at a national level and a local level, the importance of providing legal authorization for folks to work. So the movement from being a fiscal and social burden, migrants quickly became fiscal contributors. Colombia's working population today is somewhere between 3 and 4 years younger than it was a decade ago in a country that was aging naturally. So there's a huge fiscal benefit that has come to the reduced age in the workforce driven by migration. And they allowed that to be tapped into by providing legal status. And the other is what I call a host community. They took a host community approach to managing migration. Understanding that the social and fiscal burden falls on local communities where migrants arrive. And they decided to support the communities rather than just or even principally the migrants who were arriving. So you weren't fueling social tension by providing, quote unquote, special benefits to the new residents of Barranquilla or Bogotá, but rather to the communities that were becoming their new homes. And obviously, if you're supporting those communities, you are also supporting their new residents. But doing that together, I think, allowed kind of a social permission structure to take hold and allowed folks, again, to become new residents of those communities and to become contributors to those communities in a way that is, again, it's not perfect. Xenophobia is present in Colombia and elsewhere in the Americas, but has been tempered in a moment, in a decade, where you have seen unprecedented mobility in the Americas, because again, 25 to 30% of global mobility is taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is home to only 8% of the world's population.
Thank you. I think that's so interesting, talking about contribution and support for communities as key to kind of buying political consent for really those absolutely extraordinary number of migrants that Latin America is hosting at the moment. So, Frank Sherry.
Hello.
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 Immigration has been cited as one of the major reasons behind Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election. And yet it's a very widely underappreciated fact that under the Biden-Harris administration, encounters with migrants at the US-Mexico border fell from a peak of 250,000 per month in December 2023 down to 30,000 a month by the time that Biden left office. You worked on the Harris campaign. Can you take us through that sort of extraordinary fact that, firstly, how did the administration achieve those numbers and yet not get political credit for it, Frank? I'm not blaming you, honestly.
Everybody want to watch heartbreak happen as we speak. The President Biden got the politics and policy of immigration wrong for 3.5 years. And by the time the Biden administration got it right, not so much because of him, but because of policy officials at the senior level who got together and cracked the code. So what they did is they combined meaningful international cooperation from Mexico and other countries in the Americas. Dan had a big role in that. They also made it very hard for people to cross the border illegally, to apply for asylum, so that they weren't just let into the country and put into 7-year backlogs, meaning they were never going to be removed. And they expanded legal pathways so that people could apply for refugee and humanitarian visas. The combination undermined the business model of the smugglers. It made much more sense for a Venezuelan to apply for a humanitarian visa, fly in an airplane into America, be met by a sponsor, and have work permission, than to pay $10,000 to go to the border, be turned away, and be unable to get into the United States under law for years. So the incentive structure shifted. And so I give credit to the White House officials who got it right. I don't think President Biden actually kind of got this issue instinctually, and it's a big problem. But I think we can learn something from it. Look, I've worked on this issue for 40 years in a variety of capacities, now as a think tanker, which is new to me. I think it means I can say whatever the hell I want. But the things that work, at least in an American context, are that you've got to take the issue seriously because the voters take the issue seriously. It's not just a right-wing issue. It's an issue for it was the number 2 issue in the election. And so when President want to talk about it because his advisors said it'll increase the salience of the issue, it's a Republican issue, stay away from it, that ceded the narrative turf to Trump and the Republicans to define the issue. It was the Biden border crisis. It was the Democrats are the party of open borders. And with no countervailing contesting narrative, that took hold among many voters. And while inflation and cost of living was the main issue in the election, the late-breaking voters, the swing voters who decided late, they favored Trump over Harris on immigration and border security by 42 points. So we end up with an authoritarian using an immigration crackdown as the edge of the spear in his authoritarian project, rather than having a sensible policy that comports with where most Americans are. So here are the 3 things that I think for America, to get the center left to get immigration right, you've got to take the issue seriously. That's not to say make it the only issue, but don't pretend it's not an issue. I think we'll see an example of the next speaker showing that in the UK they're taking it seriously. They're leaning in. Right? Number 2, you've got to solve the problem. All the messaging in the world doesn't work if you don't have a serious solution. And again, credit to the folks who brought solutions to bear in year 4 of the Biden administration, but it was too late to make an electoral difference. The majority of Americans want a balanced policy. This is what the contours of the debate are often a mobilized right slinging simplistic slogans to mobilize fear and hate, and dare I say, a shouty left advocating for maximalist demands that make the debate seem in the public mind as it's all or nothing. If it's a debate between all or nothing, nothing is going to win.
Every time.
If it's a debate between nothing, fear and hate, simplistic solutions, scapegoating and xenophobia, and a balanced approach that says we're going to be a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, we're going to make illegal immigration work and work to sharply reduce illegal immigration, that's where the majority of people are. Americans aren't anti-immigrant, they're anti-chaos. And the border chaos drove Trump's electoral advantage in a way that really hurt Kamala Harris's campaign. So, and I learned so much yesterday by talking in some of our small group work with the Danes and the Spanish and the Swedes and the Australians. Every country has a different authentic story. But your authentic story has to be the basis for how you talk about this. In America, we're not an open borders country. We're a country that has long celebrated legal immigration and tried to deter illegal immigration. And when we tell that story of we're a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, that's not some sort of tawdry trade-off. That is a statement of values. In fact, the best way to be either is to be both. They work together. Because when we have more control at our borders, we have more generosity for expanded legal pathways. So I think that the center-left has to find its voice on this in a way that is not intimidated by the left, not cowed by the right, and it is not aping either narrative. It's a center-left narrative that says we can solve this problem in a way, we can manage this problem in a way that reflects our values and serves our interests.
Thank you, Frank. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to very quickly ask Diego and Lasse. Centre-left parties tend to struggle with immigration because they're often trying to hold together a coalition of older working-class voters with socially conservative views and often younger, more educated voters with socially liberal views. So if just like 1 minute on how you've held that coalition together with the immigration policy that you have in Spain.
You know, I totally get your points about this is an issue, so don't try to ignore it. But at the same time, I think one of the mistakes we are making in many places is that we are buying the idea that this is the only topic. So we are limited in the whole debate on this, and this one of the effects that it has is it makes you forget how aligned you are in other issues with your allies, right? So I guess one of the ideas is keeping a coalition together is not easy, but we've been the first coalition government in the history of Spain, actually. And I guess the golden rule is start making friends among the ranks of the other parties, and then never lose focus of the things that unite you, and don't focus only on the things that divide you. And then, you know, in our case, as we were talking before, we have the luck that the opposition makes things much easier many days. So.
Thank you, Diego. And Lasse, very quickly.
Very quickly, I don't know. We are not one of those parties or governments who feel that this is the only issue. We've tried to and been able to mostly to neutralize this subject. The vast majority of the Danish voters are behind us, and there's a big majority in Parliament who supports these policies. So when we were a one-party government from 19 to 22, relying on the left on all other issues, they accepted that fact, and so they didn't overthrow the government due to their disagreement on those policies. And now we are in a coalition government with parties who also agree with this point. So I would say immigration is not only a financial thing. A major part of a vast part of our fiscal surplus comes from migrant workers from Eastern European countries. We welcome them, they behave, they work, they respect the law of the land. There's no problem in saying that, and we also do that. But if you are a classical progressive and you tend to focus too much on the fiscal things, the redistribution, the financial thing. But what about minimum wage? What about social coherency? You need to attend to all those factors if you don't want to lose the majority of the voters.
Thank you. So I think my conclusion is that centre-left parties do not have to be powerless in the face of this issue. We've got different political situations in different countries, and the answers will be different in all of those countries. But I think you made an excellent point right at the beginning that whatever the solution, the government needs to be authentic. They need to make clear choices that are in line with the values that they feel authentically comfortable with advocating. And I think, if they do that, they can both shape conditions on the ground and be able to influence the political narrative and be able to give an answer to Donald Trump's challenge. So I'd just like to thank our excellent panel, and can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you so much to our morning panelists. They've been really, really insightful. Well, we're now going to take a very quick reset, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So make the most of this time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Well, our next speaker is Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer. He needs no introduction here, but he comes to this summit at a real test for his leadership. 1 year into office, under pressure from Reform UK, and on the leave of Labour conference. Just this week, he sets out plans for digital ID cards for every UK adult, which has already sparked debate about control and civil liberties. So the question is, in the next week and the months ahead, how will the Prime Minister prove that progress means delivery and not just office? Prime Minister Starmer, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning, and really good to see you. And Alita, thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you to all of you here for joining us today. And can I take this early opportunity to thank all of those that worked behind the scenes to bring this event together and allow us this opportunity to discuss. So thank you very much to them. Now, this is a gathering of people bound by a common cause, the patriotic renewal of our nations, that is underpinned by the values of dignity and respect, equality and fairness, and the belief that social democratic means are the best way to pursue that goal. But it's also a room that puts paid to a story we often hear in the press these days, that somehow our politics is dying out. Now, yes, we are in an era of huge challenge, but we can take heart when we look around the world. In fact, we only need to look around this room. Kristrún from Iceland, Pedro from Spain, Mark Carney, who stormed to victory in Canada at the beginning of this year, followed by Albo in Australia, and Akon Jonas in Norway just a few weeks ago. So, in fact, pitted against our right-wing opponents, I'd say centre-left parties are having quite a year so far. And not forgetting, there is... Good morning, Pedro. We're just hailing you being here. But not forgetting, of course, the Labour Party's victory in July of last year, getting a landslide victory here in the United Kingdom. So I'm sorry, I don't accept that argument that somehow our politics is dying out. But I do accept that it is now time for Social Democrats to confront directly some of the challenges and some of the lies, frankly, that have taken root in our societies. Because we don't just hear these stories about our politics, we also hear stories about our great countries, our communities, our cities, that simply do not match the reality that we see around us. And it's very good to have you here in London. I hope you've enjoyed yourself here in our capital city. Maybe gone out for breakfast this morning, popped into the pub for a pint last night, maybe enjoyed the last rays of sunshine in our beautiful parks. And if you have done any of those things or other brilliant things in London, you may have noticed that this city isn't the wasteland of anarchy that some would have you believe. But that, in a sense, captures what we're up against, doesn't it? And there are versions in all of your countries where places, institutions, communities are portrayed in a way that is a million miles from reality. A sort of industrialised infrastructure of grievance, an entire world, not just a world view, created through our devices that is miserable, joyless, and demonstrably untrue. And yet, in another way, and this is the challenge, also totally cohesive. because it preys on real problems in the real world, identifies clear enemies. That's us, by the way. And at its heart, its most poisonous belief, and this was on full display here in London just under 2 weeks ago, that there's a coming struggle, a defining struggle, a violent struggle for the nation, for all of our nations. And you don't have to be a great historian to know where that kind of poison ends up. And you can just feel it in a language that is naked in its attempt to intimidate. Because it's not careless or accidental. It's part of a strategy. They want politics to be a choice between globalists and nationalists, to draw a dividing line between the elites and the people, in which somehow our rich story of patriotism and pride, our common cause with working people, our deep roots in the trade union movement in our communities, the desire and demand of working people for a voice in their future is claimed by those who have nothing in common with them or their values. Only a cynical intent to exploit their fears to benefit themselves. That is what we're up against. So we must show our politics resolutely opposed to a status quo that doesn't deliver for working people. The worst thing we can do is to defend the status quo. It hasn't worked for working people. We must be determined to deliver change in their interests. Patriotic renewal, rooted in our own national stories, restoring pride where people live and work. We fight for our values, decency, tolerance, respect, and most importantly, we focus on the countries we can become through renewal. National renewal. Now, that's not a new argument for social democrats, but it is the beating heart of our politics, the nation state, harnessing the potential of the whole country, providing security and opportunity for working people, together squaring up to the challenges of a world that is frankly more dangerous, less secure than many of us have known in our lifetimes. We have to respond to that, not by turning inward, but with even deeper solidarity, alliances and partnerships built upon common values, the rules-based order that has kept the peace in our world since the last century. The coalition of the willing, strong not just because of the depth of our shared beliefs, but because we recognise that the security and safety of the people that we serve depends on our relationships, our willingness to stand up together across our different political traditions and not be cowed by tyranny. But to protect strength abroad, you do need security at home, economic stability, an approach to economic growth that can create wealth more fairly in the first place. Proud working-class towns and cities, so often disenchanted with mainstream politics because the economy does not work for them, and because that's been true for a very long time. And they're losing trust in our ability to deliver the change that they want to see. They don't want handouts or help. They want to stand on their own feet. I'll give you an example from the United Kingdom. Yesterday, we announced £5 billion to be spent by local people, however they see fit, in their communities, restoring a pub, reviving a community hall, reopening a youth club. But the important thing is not coming cap in hand to Whitehall to get the green light on a project, but actually allowing control to be with the communities where the funding is going, so they can choose what it's spent on, because those with skin in the game know what's best for their communities. It's about restoring control and agency, having the respect for working people to choose what's right for them. And that is how they stand proudly as partners in a social democratic nation. So our approach to the economy, investment, yes, of course, in everything from defence to energy, creating good, well-paid jobs. Industrial policy, yes, of course, our proud heritage of making things, relighting the fires and the factories across the country. In public services, absolutely, for all of us, from healthcare to transport, and financial prudence, which is non-negotiable. But it does also mean stripping out regulation so we can build more and build more quickly, and the private sector can create wealth in every community. Now, some people call this approach abundance. I have a different phrase for it: social democracy. But the way I see it, this is the defining political choice of our times. A politics of predatory grievance, preying on the problems of working people, and using that infrastructure of division against the politics of patriotic renewal, rooted in communities, building a better country, brick by brick from the bottom up, including everyone in the national story. Difference under the same flag. Because wherever you are in the world, we all have our different national symbols. And what I'll say is this: we must fight for them. Stand up to those who tell us that there's a tension between our symbols of pride and symbols of inclusion, our multi-ethnic modern nation and our history and heritage. There is not. They are one and the same thing. That's the social democratic argument. It is a powerful one, and we must never surrender it. But of course, you need more than symbols for nation building. You also need renewal. And it's important to be really clear on this. Renewal is not just fixing problems in some managerial sense. That is important, of course it is. People are very disappointed with the pace of change in government. It's so much slower than almost every other facet of their lives. So we do have to speed up. Poor delivery is a threat to mainstream politics. But renewal is a deeper argument. It means demonstrating to working people that, as well as the economy, the state is being run in their interests. And that does mean we've got to look ourselves in the mirror and recognise where we've allowed our parties to shy away from people's concerns and let the politics of purity patronise people. Now, you will all have issues in your own countries, but in Britain, it's illegal migration. And I suspect that may be the same in a number of other countries. For too many years, it's been too easy for people to come here, slip into the shadow economy, and remain here illegally. Because, frankly, we've been squeamish about saying things that are clearly true. It's not just that it's not compassionate left-wing politics to rely on labour that exploits foreign workers and undercuts fair wages, but the simple fact that every nation needs to have control over its borders. We do need to know who is in our country. Our immigration system does need to be fair if we want to maintain that binding contract that our politics is built on. Otherwise, it undermines trust, undermines people's faith that we're on their side, and their belief that the state can and will work for them. And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict, climate change, Issues that aren't just intolerable for those of us who care about inequality and injustice wherever it's found in the world, but which have clear consequences for our own citizens. Take Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We all have a responsibility for the future of our continent, to stand tall where oppression and violence rears its head. But it is also about energy security, because Putin and other tyrants have used their control over energy supplies as a threat. They've pushed up energy bills, threatened to keep doing so unless they get their way. And that's why we're investing in our own energy, sovereign control over our own future, whether that's nuclear, wind, solar power. Now, this will create good jobs, but it will also take the boot of tyrants like Putin off our throat. So our mission to become a clean energy superpower is about future-proofing energy supply, bringing energy bills down and protecting the planet that we all live on, doing right by our values and by our countries and our citizens. Because in this era, we must be the nation builders. We must be the patriots in our countries. We must show working people that we, and only we, can deliver the pride and belonging they seek. Their communities strong, cohesive, changed for the better, taking control of our future, tackling the big challenges, whether that's climate change or illegal migration, not shying away from them. That is how we win. That is how we rebuild. That's how renewal defeats grievance. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I need the rest of our panel. Right.
Thank you so much. My name is Neera Tandon, and I'm the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and we are so excited to co-host this day and really thrilled to be here with such incredible leaders from around the world. I want to thank Prime Minister Starmer for his words of inspiration and strength of resolve, and for being with us at the Global Progress Action Conference. And of course, it's my great honor to welcome Prime Ministers Mark Carney of Canada, Anthony Albanese of Australia, and Kristian Frostadottir of Finland.
Iceland.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. I'm thrilled to join you all for this conversation. We're living, and this is a really crucial moment because we are living in a new political moment. And as we all face rising authoritarianism and essentially significant disruption under the guise of change, we have leaders here who are addressing the challenges of their countries, people who are addressing the economic insecurities, addressing basic needs, meeting the moment without inducing fear, but inducing hope. And so as we face these challenges, we're thrilled to have these leaders here. And I'll just get right into the questions. Your respective electoral and policy victories. We have leaders here assembled who've all won election in the last year and a half. These have been points of inspiration for the progressive movement, for center-left parties, and for really democracy defenders around the world. And I'd love for you to share with us how your messages, how that resonated, and how you are meeting the needs of your constituencies, people who are deeply concerned with cost of living and other issues. Mark Carney, please take it away. Mr. Prime Minister.
I see. That was introduction, discuss. Okay, so I will go. Thank you, Neera. Thank you. This is fantastic to be at this gathering. So maybe I'll frame it a bit this way, which is
our election and what Canadians were feeling, like in many electorates, but in a slightly different way, is a sense of loss of control. That's what happens when inflation is too high, and that's what happens when there is a sense that migration isn't being adequately managed. It's also what happened, and the most sharp version of this was, of course, the tariff relationship with the United States, when all of a sudden our largest trading partner was fundamentally changing the relationship. So our election and our policy was first and foremost, it was fight the tariffs, have a reaction. We had one of the strongest reactions. Protect our workers. So there were many ways we were doing that, but one of the things is we were taking all of the tariff revenue, putting it back into workers, helping workers retain their jobs, but also retrain, protect our communities against crime. But the core, the core message was build. And it was to build and build in a positive way. You need a positive agenda, and it matters how we build. And I'll just leave you with a couple of core messages that ground our approach in the election, but very much in governing. First and foremost, we can give ourselves more than any foreign government can take away. So our ability to have one Canadian economy, we have a bunch of internal trade barriers, we're removing all of those. Our ability to build for the future new trade corridors, clean energy, artificial intelligence, build, diversify with partners, all of that is much greater than what could be taken away, even in the worst tariff scenario. So you have a positive element to that. The second thing that we emphasize is how we build. So we build as a nation. We build first and foremost thinking about workers. So the message to Canadians has been, we are going to create not hundreds of thousands of jobs, but hundreds of thousands of careers in the skilled trades and other skilled areas, and setting up in parallel with major projects and investments, apprenticeships, skilled training, so that Canadians are ready to take advantage of that. Last point, we have historic issues that are current issues in terms of reconciliation with Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous peoples, and the nature of the major investments we're doing is that there will always be Indigenous participation in the equity, in the ownership, in the building. So it's a progressive element, thinking back into workers and being inclusive with all groups and societies, with a core positive message on build. People want and deserve that positive agenda, so it's not engaging on the turf of the more negative agenda, but focusing on the positive.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to return to the theme of rebuilding. But Prime Minister Albanese, in your time in office, you had a historic election, really one of the first times in a long time, re-elected. And how are you seeing this year? How are you meeting the needs of your constituents, of Australians, in this time of rapid change globally?
A big contrast in our campaign, I think, was we had a positive agenda. And there were two themes we kept going back to make a positive difference to people's lives. No one held back and no one left behind. So no one left behind, that a Labor government will always look after the vulnerable, will look after people on issues like gender equity. What we'd done was to, for example, real wages increasing. We've had, every year we've been in office, the minimum wage has been increased at a level at least or higher than inflation. So we've seen wages share of GDP go up for the first time in a long while, for example. We have, since the election, protected penalty rates. We have introduced superannuation to paid parental leave, and we're extending that out to 6 months paid parental leave. And we have that agenda in terms of equity, but no one held back is about aspiration as well. Progressive parties have to be the party of success as well. So engagement with business, engagement with job creation, new industries. How do we seize the opportunities from the clean energy transformation to create new industries, new jobs, as well as enhance blue-collar jobs which are there as well. So we have an agenda, a Future Made in Australia agenda, which is about value-adding, not just digging things up, resources, which has been a traditional strength, and exporting them, but how do we value-add in Australia, create those blue-collar jobs, so it's connected up as well with skills and training and high-value jobs to give people that opportunity. So that really is an overall theme around, and then we match that up with policies including particularly strengthening our healthcare system. Our Medicare system is very important. That was front and centre in the campaign. People trust us. They know that we are a party that believe in healthcare through just having your Medicare card, a universal health system. And our opponents really went back into grievance and we were able to point towards as well economic management. We produced 2 budget surpluses in our first term, the first time that had happened for a couple of decades. So we also emphasised the progressive patriotism idea as well, that we could go the Australian way. We didn't need to look to others for a pattern. We wanted to stand up for our own national interest, and that meant engagement in our region as well.
Thank you so much. We will also return to the discussion of progressive patriotism, but I wanted to ask you, Madam Prime Minister, in your time in office, how are you seeing meeting this moment for the people of Iceland?
So I guess it's different when you come into government having been in opposition before, because a big part of what you're doing, especially because since I took over the party, there was a big shift in sort of focus. We went back to core social democracy, focus on housing, economy, not trying to run after identity politics. But I mean, a core in our messaging coming into government is delivery relatively quickly. I mean, to be honest, I mean, the voter out there knows, they're smart, they understand that hard, structural changes, they take time. But there are moments, I think, where you can prove that you're there for the right reasons. I mean, we already put together a ministerial committee, for example, to revamp the building of nursing homes, and we just put people in a room and we didn't let them leave until they figured it out. And there were all these issues between the municipalities, between the government, between private companies, where somebody had got pissed off or something had got stuck in the system and they just allowed it to get that way. And so we managed to push that off and get that going pretty quickly. I will say we did also have a good moment, which I think really strengthened the government, which is that even though we campaigned on these bread and butter economic policy welfare issues, there has been a historical struggle in Iceland when it comes to our resources, especially our fisheries. We have a very profitable fisheries system, but the quota holders, they've retained much of the resource rents, and a large proportion of our citizens find this an unfair situation to be in. And so one of the first things we did was raise the resource rents, and we pushed for a new bill in Parliament, and we ended up getting filibustered by the opposition, not for days, but for weeks. And we stuck with it. And it led us to leave behind certain other things that we couldn't follow through on, but we stuck with it, and we ended up actually breaking up the filibuster with what some have called a nuclear button that we have in Parliament, but I would say is a democracy button, because the opposition is supposed to have an opinion, not to govern the country. And I think people thought we wouldn't do it. And it set an example that we were able to fulfill something in our first 6 months. So if you can deliver on a few things and people see that you have your heart in the right place and you're willing to go against that type of opposition, I think it gave a lot of people hope.
Prime Minister Starmer, thank you again for your remarks. And really many countries around the world are facing a situation where there's a real rise of right-wing populism, and in some of the centrist parties, even centrist right parties, are kind of falling away. In this context, how does the center left, how do progressives meet the moment and actually capture a strong majority?
Well, I think for us, the context, certainly for the last election, was an electorate, a public, who, since the 2008 crash, hadn't seen their living wages, their living standards rise for many, many years, totally flat. Their public services had got worse and worse to the point of decimation. And there'd been a massive drop-off in trust in politics for a whole bunch of reasons. So this led to quite a strong sense of disenchantment. And if you think about the 2008 crash to last year, that's 16 years. So anyone who was maybe in their 20s, late 20s, would have gone through to their early 40s not feeling they were materially progressing in the way that they would have expected in their lives, not seeing their public services fit for purpose, and losing faith in politics as an answer to that. That's why the change slogan that we had at the election was so powerful, because people said, I want that to change, I want to break this cycle. And therefore what we're trying to do is to come in, and what I was alluding to earlier, this national renewal, is not just about fixing the problems, somehow taking them back to where we were, pre-08, pre-2010, whatever it may be, but building something better and different as you renew. So to take an example, our economy hasn't grown materially since 2008. It's been flat-lining. We need to get economic growth. That is the number one mission of the government. But it's got to be growth that is felt in every part of the country. It can't be a line on a graph, and it can't be growth in some parts of the country. It's got to be in every single part, which is why we've worked really hard on things like inward investment, record inward investment in the first year of the Labour government, and then a big top-up last week with the US state visit. But that has to be identified as to the places it's going in, to Hartlepool, into the various different, the Clyde. It's got to be place-based, and people need to see it's in my region, economic growth everywhere. Because I think for progressives, for social democrats, we for too long lost our way. We thought that redistribution was the only thing that mattered for fairness. You create wealth and then you redistribute, and that's a one-word answer for too many of our communities. It isn't. They want the pride to stand on their own 2 feet. They want the wealth to be in their community. The stuff we did yesterday in Pride in Place is really important, because what we said there was, here's a pot of money for your place, because frankly you've been overlooked for too long, and you will decide what that money is spent on. So you're not coming cap in hand to Whitehall for somebody in Whitehall to tell you. It's your decision. Same with our public services. We've got to rebuild our National Health Service, would be the touchstone for us. But we can't simply take it back to where it was. It's got to be an NHS fit for the future. It's got to change as we go forward. So there's this question of how you deliver and what renewal means in substance. And then the other part, which is really important, is that certainly in the UK now we're at a crossroads. We have got a right-wing proposition that we've not had in this country before. We've gone on for decades with elections which are basically either a Labour government or a Conservative government, pitched usually pretty much on the centrepiece of politics, the centre ground of politics. So, but now we face a very different proposition with Reform and Nigel Farage, and so the battle of our times is between patriotic national renewal in the way I've described under a Labour government, which is capable of expressing who and what we are as a country accurately and in a way where people feel they're valued and they belong, and that we can actually move forward together, versus something which is turning into a toxic divide. That march that we had here 2 weeks ago in London, in Whitehall, that sent shivers through the spines of many of our communities well away from London, not just those in the immediate vicinity. So there's a battle for the soul of this country now, as to what sort of country do we want to be, because that toxic divide, that decline with reform, it's built on a sense of grievance politics, identifying something real for sure, but relying on the problem existing in order for their politics to persist. And it's a very different choice. The choice before the electorate here at the next election is not going to be the traditional Labour versus Conservative. It's why I've said the Conservative Party is dead. Centre-right parties in many European countries have withered on the vine, and the same is happening in this country. It's a different proposition, and therefore it becomes a binary argument as to the future of our country, and it actually becomes bigger than Labour. It's about all of those that genuinely believe in the patriotism that I think is the heart of what we are as a country. So for us, it's about battling with repairing the damage that was done under the last government, which was huge, but rebuilding in a way which embraces and takes on the battle for the soul of the country, because we're going to face a very different election next time to any of the elections we fought in the United Kingdom for a very, very long time. And we need to be, that's why I think, certainly why I want this to be out as an open fight now between Labour and Reform. And I'll be majoring on this on my conference speech next week.
Thank you so much for that. Just to build on that, on those comments, Prime Minister Albanese, you referenced this a little bit, but I think what the Prime Minister Starmer is talking about is that conservative parties or far-right parties are offering a significant level of disruption, a significant change, and then we have to be drivers of an alternative, not basically go back to the status quo, but really drive an alternative vision of change. It seems like your election, you were able to do that by really having enough trust with voters. But how do you deal with that sort of competition of ideas, and how are you doing that now?
I think one of the things that you've got to say is that change happens, and get that across, not pretend that things can just stay the same. But the governments have a role in shaping change, otherwise change will shape the country without agency, if you like. And you've got to bring people with you on that journey of change. So climate change is front and centre. Our opposition at the moment are going back into a debate over whether it exists or not, basically, over whether they'll continue to support net zero by 2050. And we're saying climate change is real. This is how you have to act. Get ahead of it and bring people with you on that journey, I think, is really important. I think also that you need trust. My party and our Conservatives had both replaced sitting Prime Ministers a number of times, and that disruption annoyed people. People were like, what's the system? So one of the things that we did at the same time was to produce, I think, a stable government going forward as well, and to have the first time we've had a PM re-elected for over 2 decades. There have been 7 different results from 7 different elections. And so able to say that trust and to fulfil the commitments. So we were very disciplined about doing what we said we would do. There was one exception, which was we changed tax cuts that were built in to deliver for lower middle income earners, and we said we needed to do that. We owned it. I went to our National Press Club and said, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, because of the pressures that were on cost of living. So we were relentless about bringing things back to cost of living pressures, which was a global phenomenon. Global inflation was there as well. So, we had a 6 in front when we were elected and rose to 7, and we have now got it down within the band of with a 2 in front. And we did that without sacrificing people, and we did that as a distinction. So employment strong, over 1 million jobs created in our system, unemployment's 4.2, and real wages increasing. So we said, we'll get inflation down, but in a way that doesn't leave people behind. And since the election in May, we've been really ruthless as well about delivering on the things that we took to the election so that we could, again, fulfil that trust that people want to see. So we've cut student debt, increased paid parental leave, an increase in the minimum wage, paid prac for people studying to be nurses or teachers. We've done energy bill relief, a whole range of changes that we said we would do, we took to the election, and we've implemented, most of them, those cost of living measures in the first period, because that's what people want. If you can't relate it back to making a difference to people's lives, then some of the culture war issues and those things can come to the fore. Our opponents are going down those rabbit holes, and I think they're a cul-de-sac. They don't actually lead anywhere. Whereas if you are ruthlessly concentrating on making a difference to people's lives that they can see, then you can talk about the broader issues as well, that you might want to talk about, those longer term changes of equity and broader issues about Australia's place in the world and those issues.
Prime Minister Carney, you face special circumstances in Canada, given your neighbour to the south, and let me just apologize. And so how are you, just building on the Prime Minister's remarks about delivering and how delivery creates trust, how do you see that in the context of Canada?
Yeah, well, we all have special circumstances in our own way, I suppose. So, and I'm going to pick up what Prime Minister Albanese just said. It starts with delivering directly for the situation people are in, and and also draw a bit on what Keir was saying, which is, the reality of what you inherited, going 15 years without real wages, without people getting ahead. Like, the last time that happened was the middle of the 19th century. Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto in the British Library. I mean, there's a connection here. So you've got to deliver real wage growth first and foremost. And so, similar to in Australia, slightly different measures. First thing we did is we cut taxes for the middle class. We cut taxes for 22 million Canadians. Boom, right away. First thing we did, we cut a tax effectively for young Canadians when they're buying their first time home, cut taxes on carbon, which was also the direct carbon tax, which had become a divisive issue. It was in textbook a good policy, but a divisive issue. So very tangible things that directly affected affordability, cost of living. Those are fiscal choices, but they had to be made, and they're delivering, and Canadians are beginning to feel first that. Second, building in a way that is as inclusive as possible. I'm going to give another example, which is we need to double the pace of home building in Canada. Okay, there's lots of ways you can try to do that, but the core, we're starting from the deeply affordable end of the spectrum and building on out with some interventions from government, but driving through the private sector. The point on this is it's buy Canadian, so it's Canadian technology, Canadian lumber, which America is keeping out for the moment, he says, hopefully, and Canadian technology factory built and other aspects of that. But it's an affordability point. It's progressive in its approach because it is lower carbon in construction, it's lower carbon in operation, it's cheaper, and it fills a housing need for half of our households that we're just simply not being addressed. So all of what I've said has actually nothing to do with U.S. tariff policy, and it goes back to something I said earlier, and we say over and over again. We have learned the lesson that we need to be, we use the expression, masters in our own home. We were over-reliant on one trading partner. We can address it by building at home and diversifying, we'll get to it, I'm sure, with like-minded trading partners around the world. That's not everybody in the world, but countries that share our values, share our commitment to open markets, And again, that can more than compensate for what's happening elsewhere. And the key thing is it gives people agency. We're in charge. We're not reliant on a decision that's taken outside our border.
Madam Prime Minister, you just gave us an extremely concrete example of delivering. And I just wonder if you wanted to offer more ideas about rebuilding that sense of social trust and by delivering, and how you have a different ethos in government than your predecessors.
So there was a big change in government when we took over, because this is the second time in history where the Conservatives are not the biggest party. And the last time when the Social Democrats were in government, it was after the crisis. It was a very difficult time, so sort of the room for renewal or policy drive was very limited. And so there was a big mandate for change, but at the same time, I think there was still this sense of disbelief that a Social Democratic Party could sort of have control of the economy, do things properly. So one of the first things that we did was to make sure that people knew that we were taking the economy very seriously. We put on a new fiscal rule, which excluded investment, and said, okay, there are limits to how much, fiscal can grow. Mark likes this. We've discussed this. We discussed this. Yeah. We're gonna be balancing the budget. We're gonna be balancing the budget by 2027. And we started out by asking for ideas from the public on tidying up ideas. How do you tidy up with the government? And a big part of that is, it might sound like it's for show, but at the end of the day, a big driver of distrust, I think, in politics today, and I feel this especially because I didn't grow up in politics, I'm relatively new in all of this, is that people just feel like they're not listened to, like their ideas aren't good, and most of the times they have pretty good ideas. And so we collected all these ideas, and it was also a signal to the public that we, despite being a center-left-led government, we like the government, we like systems, we support welfare. We're not watchdogs of the system. It's not, the right tends to say the government is in our way, it needs to be broken down. We would say, okay, there are parts of it that need to be disrupted. And so we're okay by going into systems change, by talking about tidying up, doing things better, even though we might be wanting to spend more on welfare. And I think that gave us an aura of sort of cleaning up in a way. There's 3 women who are in this coalition, so like the leaders of all the parties are women. And we just have this aura of taking care of business. And I think it's really given us a good platform of then doing all sort of the progressive ideas that we need to do in housing and welfare, because we have ownership of what we're doing. So this has been a big focus of us. I also want to say, for example, when it comes to building, Iceland is an energy-rich country, but one thing you might not know is that over the past couple of years or even a decade, there's been this backlash against power, against harnessing nature. And, even in my party, we have people who want to conserve nature. I want to conserve nature. It's very important. But there needs to be a balance between ramping up, building up, getting growth. And we've been very critical of the regulations that have been set that we feel like is not promotive to growth. So we're doing these little small things that show that we're not just there to spend everybody's money. But at the same time, we have a righteousness check like we did with the fisheries. We're hitting back on the fisheries fees. We're getting income in, we're getting taxes in, and we're not just focusing on cutting. So I think that's definitely given us a lot of trust. And then I will just say at the end of the day, people vote for you to govern, to make difficult decisions. They don't want to always hear that everything you're doing is easy, that they appreciate it. If you say no to some things and then you say, this is going to be difficult for a year or 2, but I'm sure it's going to be better, because it gives you trust. So we've been pretty clear on that this is a longer term project, and I think it's given us credibility, at least for now. Let's see what happens in a year or so.
I just want to pick up on some of what Mark was saying, because on the one hand, we've got the domestic situation here in the UK, as I described, a different political divide that's opened up. But that's happening at the same time as much more instability and conflict around the world. The global situation is as fragile as I think many of us have known it. I have to say, when the Berlin Wall came down, I didn't think that I'd see Russian tanks going across European borders in my lifetime. I really didn't. I mean, yet we've seen it. That conflict is not just about the sovereignty of Ukraine. It is about the ambition of Putin and our values, our freedoms. It's already impacted hugely on energy prices, etc., here in the United Kingdom. And it has shattered the idea that the comfortable peace dividend that we have enjoyed for years is here necessarily to stay, and therefore we have to rise to this moment. And on security and defence, we're in a different era. There is no doubt about that. You can feel that all across Europe and beyond. Countries are spending more on defence. And we have set up the Coalition of the Willing. That is a group of like-minded countries focused in the first instance on how do we provide the security that will be needed if there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, but equally, and really important for me, as a vehicle to ensure that the countries in the coalition are willing, particularly the European countries, step up on defence and security in a way we haven't. Because for years we've pretty well neglected this. We haven't been in the right place. We've assumed that the peace dividend would last for much longer. And now we've got to step up into that space. And so Coalition of the Willing, for me, is about, yes, Ukraine, but it's about a bigger argument about how we step up on defence and security in this new era. And we have to combine this with what's going on at home. So at home, you've got the how do you deliver on the real things that matter to people day in, day out, whilst at the same time attending to the international issues, which are huge. And going back to Mark's point, it's not just defence and security. Trade and the economy in our world is changing. It's moving to a different place. You can have your own view on tariffs. You may think they're good, bad, or indifferent, but the fact is they're here. President Trump believes in them, uses them, and we have to understand that. It's a profound belief that he has about the way he wants his economy to be reshaped. We can commentate on that, or we can understand we're living in a different world, and therefore we have to react to that, which means being much clearer about, in my view, the role of the state in our own countries, working with our industries, our sectors, so that it's not just a sort of free-for-all, market knows best, but actually much more focused and directed, but also how do we lower trade inhibitors across like-minded countries, which is why we've pushed so hard to get our trade deal with the US, particularly on relation to tariffs on things that matter to this country. Car manufacturing will be the best example of that, but also the trade deal that we did with India, which had been tried for many years, and moving closer to the EU through the EU-UK reset. Is part of re-establishing the UK on the world stage, which we had to do. It's very important, but is also recognising on defence and security and on trade and the economy, we are living in a different, much more difficult world than the world we were living in just a few years ago. And therefore, you've got the remaking of domestic politics in a world where on defence and security and trade and the economy, we are in a new era, and bringing that together is hugely important. Not easy, because there's always this tension as to what happens internationally versus what happens at home. I have to say, I don't think we've been in a time where the domestic impact of what's happening internationally has been as profound and as direct as it is at the moment. What happens in the rest of the world is having a direct impact on the United Kingdom in a way that wasn't the case, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it is It's a very profound challenge that we all face, which is why it's important to have gatherings like this, where we can come, share our experience, exchange our thoughts, and ask the question, how does social democracy respond to some of this?
Yeah. Prime Minister Carney, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'll just add to that very quickly. Our core policy, our core message in the election campaign, our core policy now it's called Canada Strong. Okay, we're building Canada Strong in a variety of ways. And our foreign policy, to link it to foreign policy, has traditionally been a value-based foreign policy. Okay. We're realizing that it's not just the strength of our values, but the value of our strength. Mm-hmm. And how do we build that strength? It's making choices at home in terms of defense and security, and it's marrying that strength with like-minded partners. And what we're living through, all of us, what we're living through is not a transition, it's a rupture. Mm-hmm. It's a big change in the trading system, and we're not going back. Nostalgia is not a strategy there. Big change in geopolitical risk. We have agency, but we have to build strength at home, find those like-minded partners, bring together. And in doing so, we deliver for our citizens, but also it gives a confidence and a purpose to the country that is empowering.
And I think that speaks to the patriotism that you talked about. So just as we're closing, if you have a few more words, Prime Minister Albanese, about the topic you mentioned, which is progressive patriotism.
Yeah, that I think on the range of issues, be it trade, that means standing up for, in our case, Australia's national interest. We're also aiming to diversify our trade interests, and from us, the driver of that in part was that there were restrictions from China, our major trading partner, so we've reached out particularly to ASEAN, to the growing economies to our north, but also the other partnerships that we have as well. Migration is a big issue. When it comes to migration issues, one of the theme of our approach is you can be strong on borders without being weak on humanity. So we have strong border controls through Operation Sovereign Borders. We've continued, but at the same time we've increased the number of asylum seekers who we take. We abolished temporary protection visas to give people that security to fully participate in society. People who'd been in Australia some for more than a decade, they weren't going back anywhere, but to really emphasise that Australian values are there. I think there are attempts by some on the far right to own nationalism, and so it's a matter of not being nativist about it, but being proud of who we are and what we're achieving. And Australian society has the oldest continuous culture on earth in First Nations people, but we also are a multicultural society as well, who've welcomed people from all over the world. We're all either migrants or descendants of migrants, except for First Nations people. So we have a Prime Minister called Albanese and a Senate leader called Wong. And that's who we are as a modern society. And I think that is really important as well, that we're embracing who we are and being proud of it.
And just finally, Madam Prime Minister, as you see this conversation, how do you see this idea of sort of progressive patriotism?
I mean, speaking for Iceland at least, can you imagine? If you're an Icelandic person, you have to be proud. You're there in the middle of the ocean and you're your own country. Icelanders are very proud. And we have this strange relationship with the outside world because we're so addicted to it, but at the same time, we have our own language. We've done really well for ourselves, despite a lot of reasons why we may not have. What I will say is that you get really far ahead when it comes to trying to unite people behind, whether it's the flag or patriotism or the nation, by showing people respect. And I do think, and I'm sure everyone here in this room can agree, that center-left social democracy for some time, starting having a conversation too much up here. They were talking at people, not with them. They weren't talking about concrete matters. And what is patriotic is meeting people where they're at, understanding that your mandate comes from the people, that you're not supposed to tell people how they feel, but you're supposed to experience how they feel and try to run based on that. And so, to me, patriotism has meant trying to join the country together, all of Iceland, not just urban-centric, very globalist mindset, even though it's very important that we have international relationships. We just need to be able to get to a level where we're having real conversations with people. And at the end of the day, people want togetherness, they want humanity, they want to be kind to their neighbor, but they just want the systems to work. So they want you to go to work and disrupt those systems if they need to work. You don't even have to talk that much about it. Just do it. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's what we're all going to be measured on. Are we building those nursing homes? Did those house builds go up? Do you have health care? It's not just the rhetoric. So, again, we'll see where we're at in a couple of years, but I think we can do it.
Right? Just do it is a great motto for how democracies can deliver. I want to thank this incredible panel, and I have to say, the future is bright when you have leaders who are focused on delivering. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we are going...
Well, don't run away just yet. We're on to our next panel, which is about meeting the moment. Sounds good on a summit stage, meeting the moment, but meeting it with what exactly? People do not want slogans. They want proof. And that's what this panel will explore if you do stay with us. So on the stage now, we'll have Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, USA, a Democratic governor who has made state-level progressive leadership central to America's political debate. We'll also have Magdalena Andersson, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, who steered her country through crisis. And moderating, we'll have Elly Schlein, leader of Italy's Democratic Party and Member of Parliament. But do stay with us as they join the stage now.
So we should have... Okay, we can start. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to be with GB. I'm Elly Schlein, the leader of the Partito Democratico in Italy, opposition party right now, with an extreme right government of Giorgia Meloni.
And I suppose I'm Governor J.B. Pritzker, and I'm in the opposition party, but not in my state. I am the governor.
So it's particularly important to be here on stage after three prime ministers that I must thank for their leadership in these days, also in New York, on Palestine, and I thank them for the strength that they have shown in that discussion. In Italy, we are worried about the international situation, GB, and I wanted to ask you to start off, what is your position on how Trump is dealing with the historical friendship between the European Union and the US? I mean, we must not give up our transatlantic alliance and friendship, even now when Trump started a commercial war towards our countries and towards the European Union that is damaging strongly our economies. So what is your position on this, on what Trump is doing with the historical partners and allies?
Well, my observation is that the challenges that the Trump administration has brought to the transatlantic alliance are multifaceted. Let's start with the economic relationships and then move to the defense relationships. And we cannot afford to lose either one. Our relationship from a defense perspective has been, I think, severely impacted by the shifting sands of the United States engagement in the Ukraine-Russia war. It was my understanding and my belief that the United States should stand in solidarity with a country whose borders have been invaded, and that our advocacy should be for a democracy that is being put to the test by a rival, indeed an enemy of the United States. And it is thoroughly unusual in my lifetime to see a kind of shift in policy that has occurred nearly immediately with regard to a war in which we had an ally, in which we were supporting an ally, and now we have essentially abandoned that ally. I say that in the context of a broader transatlantic relationship because obviously our view of the war between Ukraine and Russia is really about preserving the democracies and the protection of and the defense of Europe writ large. And we all know that Vladimir Putin has designs that are much further than just Ukraine. And if he's allowed to hold territory or even advance further in Ukraine, it's an admission that we're okay with his his expansionist policies. So I worry a lot from a defense perspective about what the transatlantic relationship is now as a result of the change in that policy, not to mention Trump's attitude toward NATO, which we could talk about, how much defense spending Europe should be putting forward, and that's all worthy of some debate and discussion, but it is challenging from my perspective for that continued defense relationship. The economic relationship, bewilders me. I do not understand why Donald Trump has taken it upon himself to put tariffs across the board. We're believers, I'm a believer, that tariffs are okay if you're working on getting a trading partner to drop some tariff or some barrier that exists, and that you need to counter that existing economic relationship in order to, again, bring down barriers. Trade is good in general for multiple countries to be doing with one another. Tariffs impede that trade. They raise prices. In the United States, they've raised prices significantly for working class and middle class people. So I'm worried a lot about how the relationship between the United States and Europe in particular has been affected by those two big policy changes from this administration.
Well, the damage is huge. I'll take as example our country. You know that Italy